Hi everyone, my name's Aimano Manda. I'm a senior associate at Musa Dudhia Co, a full-service law firm that's based in Osaka and which has been providing legal services to clients both locally and internationally from 1958. I'm here at the American Chamber of Commerce today to speak to you about the recent enactment of the Cybercrimes Act and the Data Protection Act of 2021 on 1st April 2021, and just briefly speak about the potential impact on, let's say, business at large in Zambia. However, before going in briefly into the provisions of these two acts, I'd first like to just take a moment and look at the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act of number 21 of 2009, which is an act which preceded the enactment of these two pieces of legislation which we're discussing today. So when we look at the Electronic Communications and Transactions Act number 21 of 2009, which I'll call in short the ECT Act, what we see is that this act contained various provisions on data protection, cybercrimes, and electronic transactions. So over the past couple of years, the government through the Ministry of Transport and Communications has been looking at repealing the ECT Act of 2009 and replacing it with three pieces of legislation. So what has actually happened this year is that has actually come into fruition with the enactment of the Cybercrimes Act, the Data Protection Act, and the ECT Act of 2021. So, but of particular importance today is the Cybercrimes Act and the Data Protection Act of 2021. So when we look at the Cybercrimes Act of 2021, what we actually see is that it substantially contains provisions similar to those which were contained in the ECT Act of 2009. Of course, what we note is that there are minor differences. So for instance, it brings in new definitions of what's considered to be cybercrime. Then it also speaks about harassment. And then why it actually came into force is because there was a concern that the law that we had didn't actually address the change in people's use of, let's say, the internet, as we've seen across the last couple of years. But then what we see is that even though that concern has been there, the law doesn't really change from the law which was enacted in 2009. Yes, there are issues of identity theft, and there's also issues of harassment, and let's say if you deny the existence of a Holocaust or a genocide occurring, those are now considered to be offenses. But then when we look at the substantive provisions of the law, procedures to be followed, as well as the regulator, which is the Zambia Information and Communications Technology Authority, all these things remain the same. And so since all those things remain substantially the same, the question then is, why the outcry when things are substantially the same? And so the way I would then look at it is that you have packaging, the ECT Act, which contains everything. You walk into a shop and you buy cereal, you buy sugar, you buy meat, and you place this all in one package. And then in 2021, what actually happens is that you place your cereal in one package, your meat in another package, and your vegetables in a third package. So now in relating this to the enactment of the Cybercrimes Act, is the Cybercrimes Act is just placed in its own separate package. So then what actually happened is an exercise of repackaging, but essentially the content substantially remains the same. And so we do not see much of a change as to the way in which entities can go about their business due to the enactment of this act. But then when we move on to the Data Protection Act of 2021, what we actually see is substantial legislative changes which have been introduced. Because previously, all that we had was one part of the ECT Act of 2009 relating to data protection. So the personal information, which is, let's say, my name, my identity number based on my passport, NRC, or driver's license, would actually be collected from me and then processed in accordance with a single part of the Act. All that was required was my written consent for that to be undertaken. But then what we now see is that there are actually changes to the manner in which my personal data can actually be obtained from me. So now what happens is that a party that wishes to obtain my personal data will need to be registered with the Data Protection Commissioner, which is an office which is yet to be established under the Data Protection Act. Then once they've actually registered, that's when they can then request and collect my personal information. And then once they collect it, they can then process it in accordance with the purposes for which they've actually explained it to me. Then other changes are, once my personal information is collected, it has to be stored on servers that are located in Zambia. And these servers, and it can only be transported outside the country subject to approval of the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So now when we look and see to say which particular act should more attention be given to, we actually have to focus on the Data Protection Act, because this is an act which actually changes everything, and it also brings in requirements of an entity needing to appoint a data protection officer who will be in charge of ensuring that the company is actually complying with the provisions of the Data Protection Act. And so this is an act which we need to pay particular attention to, especially when companies are undergoing their business operations, and more so that there are now more stringent requirements to register and ensure compliance with the Act. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope you have a good day.